Hello everyone, and welcome to Movie Tellers. Today we'll be recapping a movie called The Sleeping Dog, so sit back, relax, and let's dive in. The movie opens with former detective Roy Freeman, who wakes up from surgery after an accident. He's now suffering from Alzheimer's disease, leaving him with no memory of his past or who he is. One day he receives a call from a woman named Emily Dietz, who claims to work for a non-profit legal advocacy group called the Clean Hands Project. They fight for inmates who have been disenfranchised by the justice system. Emily asks to meet Roy regarding a case he worked on 10 years ago. In the next scene, they meet at a bar. Emily explains that it's about an old case involving Isaac Sammel, a man currently on death row for the murder of Professor Joe Weider. Roy admits he doesn't remember anything about the case. Emily shows him a newspaper article about the crime and tells him that Isaac specifically requested to speak with Roy. Back home, Roy pulls out a box of old case files and starts going through them, hoping to jog his memory. He begins having flashbacks. The next day, he visits Isaac in prison. Isaac thanks Roy for putting him away, but insists he's about to die for a crime he didn't commit. He recounts the night of the murder. He was there, but someone else entered before him and committed the killing. Isaac says he panicked and fled before seeing who it was. Roy is skeptical, but Isaac urges him to speak with Richard Finn, a man writing a book about the case who had recently visited him. Isaac tells Roy, "Make this right before I'm dead." Determined to stimulate his brain, as recommended by his doctor, Roy dives back into detective work. He visits his old partner, Jimmy Remis, and explains his condition and the Isaac Sammel case. Roy shares that he believes Isaac might be innocent and wants to reopen the case. Though Jimmy agrees to help, there's a suspicious look on his face that suggests otherwise. Later, Roy gets a call from Jimmy, saying he found Richard Finn. Roy heads over, only to find Richard dead, apparently from a fentanyl overdose. But Roy notices only one needle mark and suspects foul play, believing Richard wasn't a drug user. A memory flashes. He recalls seeing Richard at the original crime scene. Jimmy, however, reminds Roy that Isaac's fingerprints were all over the house, and he had confessed to the murder. He urges Roy to drop the case, saying, "The dead don't talk," but Roy insists they do. They leave clues. In the next scene, Roy attends Richard's funeral, where he meets Richard's brother, Finn. He tells Finn he's investigating a case Richard was interested in and asks about the book Isaac mentioned. Finn takes Roy to his car and hands him the manuscript, titled The Book of Mirrors. He dismisses it as a bunch of nonsense, but admits Richard never seemed like someone who would use drugs. Roy takes the book home to study it, hoping it holds the key to the truth. As Roy reads through the Book of Mirrors, the movie shifts to visually portray the story written by Richard Finn, narrated in his own voice. The scenes follow Richard's account of the murder of Professor Joseph Weider, which he claims was orchestrated by Laura Barnes. The scene opens at a lively party. Richard arrives and notices Laura, who walks up to him and starts a casual conversation. They quickly hit it off. During their exchange, they introduce themselves. Richard and Laura. Laura mentions she's attending the party with Professor Weider, who's helping her with her thesis. Richard observes Laura playing with her earring and recalls reading somewhere that when a woman touches her jewelry, it often means she's flirting. Their chemistry is immediate, and the next scene cuts to the two having intense, exotic sex. This marks the beginning of their passionate relationship. Months later,
We were inseparable.
Richard receives a call informing him that his father has died of a heart attack and his mother can no longer afford his room and board. Laura offers to help, leading Richard to meet Professor Joseph Weider for the first time. The professor invites them both to dinner. As they eat, Weider explains a project he and Laura have been working on, a psychological system and a drug formula designed to treat PTSD. He even experiments on Richard, surprising him with the effects. After dinner, Weider shows Richard a workspace filled with books and research. Excited, Richard agrees to assist him. Over the following days, he helps organize and catalog the professor's work. As time passes, Richard begins to notice the closeness between Laura and the professor. He suspects there's more than a professional relationship between them. One evening, Richard receives a voice message from Laura, saying she'll be late because she's working with Weider. Suspicious, Richard returns to Weider's house secretly, only to witness Laura and the professor making out. Heartbroken, he goes back home and keeps the discovery to himself. The next day, while working, Richard finds a manuscript titled The Mirror Effect. It's credited only to Professor Weider, but Laura's name is scribbled on it in pen. Suddenly, Weider enters, takes the manuscript away, and invites Richard to eat. During the meal, Weider directly confronts Richard about his relationship with Laura. Richard denies anything is going on, but the professor isn't convinced. He warns Richard to stay away from her. Later, Richard returns home to find that Laura is gone. She's packed up all all her belongings and vanished. The next day, Professor Weeder is found dead, and a supposed junkie confesses to the murder. However, a week before the murder, Laura had gone to see Susan Avery, Weeder's contact at the Department of Defense, to claim ownership of Weeder's work. After the murder, Laura disappeared. Unfortunately, Richard never finished the book, leaving the story and Roy without closure. Determined to get more answers, Roy visits Richard's wife, who shares her perspective. She describes Richard as paranoid, frequently yelling into the phone. One day, she secretly dials the number he'd been calling. A woman picks up. She now believes Laura may have been involved in Richard's death, especially since Richard was never a drug user. Connecting all the dots, Roy continues his research and eventually tracks down Laura. He confronts her and hands her Richard's book, asking her to read it. She accepts the book, and Roy walks away. The next scene begins with Roy receiving a text from Jimmy. It reads, "I found Weeder's caretaker. His name is Wayne." Roy drives out to meet him. Roy questions Wayne, who reveals that Professor Weeder was developing a drug meant to cure PTSD. Wayne himself was chosen as a test subject due to the trauma he suffered during the war in Iraq. While the medication initially worked, its side effects were severe, and he eventually stopped taking it. On their way back from the meeting, Roy asks Wayne for a ride home. As they drive, Wayne opens up about the strange things he experienced at Weeder's house, particularly how the professor had a collection of sex tapes recorded with various women. After the long drive, Wayne drops Roy off at his home, and as he walks away, he secretly calls someone and says, "I'm home now." Moments later, Roy takes a walk to grab some food. On his way back, a truck suddenly speeds toward him, attempting to run him down. Thinking fast, Roy pulls out his gun and shoots at the vehicle, killing the driver. He approaches the body and is shocked to discover it's Devereaux. Roy immediately calls the police and reports the incident. The screen jumps forward to the police station, where Roy sits silently staring at an old case file. That day, he pays a visit to his partner Jimmy and confronts him, accusing him of being involved in Weeder's murder. Roy explains that after digging through 30 years of case files, he found Jimmy's name and his old partner's, connected to them all, but Roy's name never appears in the Weeder file, only Jimmy's. Furious and hurt, Jimmy storms off, shouting, "After all these years together, you accuse me? You, Roy." Overwhelmed with guilt and confusion, Roy begins drinking heavily, ignoring his doctor's warning. He downs bottle after bottle of whiskey until he passes out, waking up the next morning on the side of the road. He stumbles to a nearby bar, asking the bartender for a woman named Diane, his late wife, who used to work there. The bartender gently informs him that Diane died 5 years ago. Roy asks to use the bathroom. While inside, he begins having vivid flashbacks of the original crime scene. Just then, he receives a call from Susan Avery, Weeder's contact at the Department of Defense. She explains that Weeder had been developing a powerful PTSD treatment, but he was killed before completing his research. Now, a modified version of the formula has been published, under Laura's name. Susan hands Roy a copy of the book and gives him the address to Weeder's house. When Roy arrives at the house, he experiences strong déjà vu, like he's been there before. He grabs a metal hanger from the yard and begins digging at a specific spot in the ground. Eventually, he uncovers a bat, the same one used in the murder. Suddenly, Laura appears, followed closely by Jimmy, who's holding a gun. He tells Roy to put the bat back in the hole and orders both of them inside. Inside, Roy accuses Jimmy of killing Professor Weeder, but Jimmy insists he didn't. Instead, he says Laura killed Richard Finn using Devereaux as her pawn. Roy counters, pointing out that both Jimmy and Laura knew each other well. The truth begins to unravel. Laura killed Richard Finn, and Jimmy blackmailed her for stealing Weeder's work. In return, he helped frame Isaac Samuel to cover up Weeder's murder. Jimmy admits he did it for money. He needed it to pay for treatment for his sick wife. But the ultimate question still hangs. Who killed Weeder? Jimmy tries to convince Roy that Laura is a manipulator who uses people for her own gain, then walks away clean. Before he can say more, Laura shoots Jimmy. She then turns the gun on Roy, but with his last breath, Jimmy fires one final shot, killing Laura. Jimmy looks at Roy and says, "I did this for you, Roy," before dying. Roy goes to the police and tells them everything. With his confession and all the evidence, Isaac Samuel is finally granted freedom. Later, Roy returns home. He sits down to complete his puzzle and walks over to the wall, where he pulls down an old wedding photo of himself and Diane. Suddenly, a final wave of flashbacks hits him. He remembers a meeting with Laura years ago, at the bar where Diane worked. Laura had told him, "Your wife is being taken advantage of by Professor Weeder." Roy refused to believe it, but then Laura handed him a tape. He went home and played the recording. It showed Diane having sex with Weeder. Consumed with rage, Roy went to Weeder's house with a bat and beat him to death. Isaac had been there too. He witnessed the murder but fled. Jimmy, seeing what Roy had done, decided to cover it all up, pinning the murder on Isaac to protect Roy. Now remembering everything, Roy silently picks up his coat and walks off screen. The end. If you enjoyed this movie recap, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching Movie Tellers.